Okay. I am thrilled to introduce you to a new friend of mine for the podcast. I have been stalking some of the interviews that Caesar has been doing on different shows to learn some more about him. I would love to have Caesar introduce himself to you, my listeners. Who is Caesar, and why is he so darn interested in discipleship? Take it away, Caesar.
Well, I'm just a regular guy who grew up in the Midwest, being taken to church every Sunday morning, and not 100% sure why what we were trying to accomplish. It seemed primarily focused on our afterlife and trying to have behavioral modification and sin management between now and our afterlife. So I'm very interested in discipleship that happens and occurs in everyday life and as part of our lifestyle because I really have come to believe with all my heart that Jesus didn't die on a cross and give his life so that we could sit in rows, largely in silence for about an hour, hour and a half, 1.4 times a month or whatever the
Yeah,
number
yeah,
is. And so as my wife and I and our family and now a lot of people and friends have learned to make discipleship a lifestyle, what freedom. And
yeah, yeah.
we love it.
Somebody has said that, all like of these things that people are passionate about is autobiographical. So tell me
Hmm.
what it is. I am sure there has been some experience that you were like, hey, maybe this isn't working the way I want it to, and I want it to work better. Or you just saw it so work in such a great way that you wanted to dedicate more of your life to being about discipleship. What was that for you?
Life was always pretty involved in faith for me in very different ways. And around the time that my wife and I had our first son, we had a pretty big awakening to like, hey, whoa, this is really
Yeah.
something God's calling us to make a little bit more serious about life. But what we knew from my upbringing was just sort of church attendance, and then try to, like I said, try to sin less, during the week, and sign up for as many church programs as you can fit into your schedule. And I started though in another sort of area of my life, Amy. I started traveling quite a bit overseas, doing what the church would call missions work. I think all of
Yeah.
life is
Yeah.
missions, but but we started spending. I started spending a lot of time in places like Sudan and Sierra Leone and Burma and a lot of places where there was war going on and great Christian persecution. And so many of these people had nothing. I mean, like no things. We'd go trip after trip, and they're all wearing the exact same clothes or not, no clothes. And the church didn't have buildings and programs. They didn't have cameras and lights and action, and all that. But they had such joy, and I felt like when we were there, we were the church. But then I would come home, and by the miracle of flight, 24 hours later, I'd be driving up the big old driveway to the church campus that I was a pastor
Yeah.
at. And I was head of production. So it was lights, camera, action. And it was like, okay, I love our church, but now I feel like we're putting on church.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, and for the last 3 weeks, we were being the church. And so I started just wondering, like, do we get to live like we live on these trips with people, like here at home? And I'm reading the book of Acts, and it looks like that's how the church used to live. And these people in the church live this way. And we decided to follow God out to the West Coast here. I live in Seattle now. I'm from the Midwest originally,
Yeah.
live in the Seattle area now. And turns out, yes, we do get to live our life like almost like missionaries, but here, everywhere, anywhere we live.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that experience of seeing and experiencing that so richly caused us to desire to live that out every day, not just sort of on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
And
So you saw
that,
a difference between production and
yeah,
discipleship. Or
yeah,
was it the same thing?
for us, it was performance. I mean,
Okay.
I was head of production. It's thousands of people. I had the keys to the spaceship, if you will, because I was head of production, and so and then I also was one of the teacher preachers there, and so my head would be up on the 15-foot screens as well on Sundays, and it was I didn't hate it or anything, but
Yeah.
it got harder and harder to want to sort of do church versus be the church.
Yeah.
And that's not an indictment on our Sunday experiences and all that. But in my experience, though, it kind of stopped there. And then as the staff, especially, we would spend all week just planning for, assessing last week's Sunday, next week's Sunday. Oh, by the way, Easter's coming. Oh, by the way, Christmas is going to be bigger this year than ever, right? And I was head of production, so it's like, oh yeah, right,
Yeah, yeah,
And it was multiple services every week, and some weeks many, if it was a holiday weekend or some special promo going on. And it was just like, okay, wow, how does your average person experience their faith and the beauty of the gospel in everyday life? And I don't even know how to apply it, to be honest with you. I don't know
yeah,
how the gospel speaks to marriage and parenting and gender and vacations and all those things and retirement and all that. I really only know how it deals with my sin problem, I guess, and my afterlife upgrade.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
got to be more, right? And God
yeah,
was leading us to understand, oh yeah, the gospel speaks into every part of life.
yeah.
Now the kingdom has come.
I'm guessing that you are not about to advocate for everybody to leave their churches and just be on a mission trip or be missionaries overseas or abroad. Maybe you are. Maybe that's the spoiler that's coming. Um,
You mean advocating for people to leave their churches?
yeah, yeah.
No, not at
What
all.
yeah. So in reality then, especially if people are like passionate about people following Jesus, personally they want to follow Jesus and they want to help others follow Jesus. Maybe they're in leadership at a church and all they know how to measure is attendance and new members, baptisms, and the number of people that are signing up for Bible study and
Yeah,
coming to events.
we call that the three
How
B's.
Yes, tell me about this.
Well, in my experience, both as a church leader at a big church and been part of many, but now having coached so many leaders, we call the three B's. You hit two of the same of our three. It's butts and seats, like attendance. That's our big jam. Um, Budget, are we is giving going up? How's that budget? We're never quite making it. And then building size. We're always adding on and needing to have a building program and all these types of things. And I just don't see that as any of the metrics that Jesus used to measure, or Paul, or any of the other disciples who made disciples. I didn't see any of those as the measurements, as the metrics. Now I think we can find value and understand that, but unfortunately, when we primarily measure attendance, butts and seats, then and I think it's been a big part of what's led to, then we've missed the mission. The mission is to make disciples of Jesus. And we
Yeah,
define that, Amy, by saying discipleship's this process of helping others, them helping us move from unbelief to belief in light of the gospel in every area of life, not just about our afterlife or our
yeah,
atonement needs, but about every area of life, moving from unbelief to belief, or from lies to truth, or, right, in every area of life. Well, if that's the case, and I believe it is, I see that throughout scripture and what Jesus did and modeled, then we're going to have to do every area of life together. And I think
yeah,
when we started making the big deal was that a Sunday attendance number, it certainly was for me growing up. It was always like literally charts with stars on them, and you were like better and more loved if you made it all the time. Like,
yeah,
you've gone 100 Sundays without ever missing, so here's a little special, gift for you. Or like, whoa, or you brought this many friends to church on, March to Sunday school in March, or whatever.
yeah,
What happens? We started missing. Hey, but discipleship happens in everyday life. It's not a set of classes. It's not 6 lessons, 9 lessons. It's not a 101 class, 201, 301, 401. Oop, oop, now you're discipled. It is life on life, life in a community, and life on mission. And you just don't get that sitting in rows, largely in silence, and then shooting out the door back to my American dream life. It
yeah.
just,
That
it
sounds
doesn't.
harder to measure. Is there a way to measure that? Like, how do you know as somebody that maybe is leading a discipleship ministry, like, yes, they're like, yes, I resonate with this. Now, how do I how do I quantify it? Can I put it on a spreadsheet is what I'm asking.
Well, I think parts of it we can. And I don't think that measuring attendance is horrible or evil or
Right.
anything like that. But, I've actually created, and it's a bit of an ongoing list, but I share it with others and I can make it available to listeners if you'd like. Uh, the 10 benchmarks of a healthy church that's actually on mission, on God's mission, not the mission to grow their Sunday service, but like what Jesus gave us, which is discipleship.
Right.
And you start looking at things like, uh, do we see people moving from far from God to walking with Jesus and moving on to leadership in this local church? So indigenous leadership
Mhm.
occurring. That's a Because if that one's happening, then probably a whole lot of the other things that we're hoping goes well is happening, right?
Yeah.
If someone could come to faith in our community and now they're a part of leadership versus, well, we hire out why don't you just raise up disciples who move to maturity?
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
because we don't really disciple very well. Things like, are people growing in what we call gospel fluency? In other words, not Bible literacy, learning lots and lots of facts about the Bible, but a fluency, like the language of the gospel and how it speaks into everyday life and how we experience the gospel in our marriages and with neighbors who maybe are going through hard times, divorce, sickness, abuse issues that are coming back up in their life, or they've been harmed by the church, or all these things. How does the gospel, good news, speak to that? Not good advice, but good news.
Yeah.
Do we see our people in our community, whatever the size, opening up their homes and their lives increasingly to not yet believers, to do life with them, and are they
Yeah.
treating them like family, not like guests, and things like that? So we've got sort of the 10 benchmarks of that, and a little self-assessment that people, if they want, maybe later we can give them a link or something. But yeah, we just started realizing that to grow a healthy church that made disciples who actually make disciples,
Mhm.
we needed to start measuring some different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me, what do you think when people picture discipleship, what are some misconceptions do you think that is out there when it comes to that?
Great question. I think most of us have this because this is what we were taught or handed as discipleship. If it's happening, is a series of classes, and it's really primarily about passing on a lot of head knowledge. That's a misconception.
What's a better way?
I think a better way is what we see Jesus modeled, and then when he sent his disciples to go make more disciples, they did the exact same thing. Is they did life together. The church was never a building. We say we're going to church. Well,
Yeah.
you can't go to church. You either are the church, that's people, or you're not, right? Um, there was never this service that was referred to as the church. The church, the words used is oikos. It's a Greek word that means extended family. So
Yeah.
the church that met at Amy's house, her extended family. Well, who's that? Well, it's some of her kids who are still in the area, and it's her best friend, and it's a couple people she works with, and it's a few other neighbors, and they're all learning to walk in the ways of Jesus and move from unbelief to belief in increasing ways. And I think that that's the only way discipleship happens is with the gospel at the center, not the church attendance at the center or just
Yeah.
head knowledge, the Bible knowledge at the center, but a fluency of the gospel in a community, because it takes all of us to make a mature disciple. Think about this, Amy. We're called to make disciples of Jesus, not of Caesar or Amy.
Yes. Yes.
And so if I just disciple someone one to one for a year or two, well, they're going to probably most resemble me spiritually. And
Yeah.
while that might be an upgrade, meaning they're learning some stuff,
Yeah.
I'm not exactly like Jesus. Ask my wife, ask my family, our
Right.
extended, our oikos. Like God's changing me and growing me, but I'm not exactly Jesus here.
Right. Right.
And what happens, that Jesus says the church is the body, his body. We need all the body parts coming into a person's life, different experiences, giftings God's given them. I need all of that rubbing up and pushing on my unbelief and selfishness and preference. And then the third part of that, so gospel and community, is and then I need to be taken out on mission. We need to have a focus on who else. What other kids does God have that is far from him and doesn't trust dad and doesn't love dad, doesn't understand Jesus' great love and sacrifice for them? Like without that mission, we become very self-focused. And that's part of that problem again of a gospel that's primarily focused on my afterlife, my happiness, my personal quiet time, my joy, my peace, my, eternity. Well, then it becomes all about me. And I
Yeah.
just don't see that in scripture. That's not what Jesus said. He didn't list all the things, your upgrade. It was all about his
Right.
father's glory and understanding and showing people what dad was like. And when we live this way and we start looking for who else doesn't know dad, that's the mission part of it. And who else needs to be discipled or gets to be discipled and walk in the ways of Jesus. That's how we get to maturity. You have to have the gospel at the center. It has to be in community. Can't do community sitting in rows,
Right, right.
silence once a week or 1.3 times a month or whatever the national average is now. And if you don't have the outward impulse, like who's next, we get these small groups in our churches, and most are very, very self-focused. If
Mhm.
I ask people who or what's your, the focus of your small group, and they're like, well, us getting to know each other and us having a good time or us studying the sermon notes again or whatever. But what about your neighbors? Well, this wouldn't make sense to them. They don't go to our church. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. What you said about not about resisting discipling someone into becoming like ourselves is that's so fascinating to me. I just shared an episode today where I interviewed Becky Castle Miller. She's working on her PhD under Esau McCulley right now at Wheaton. And she said that she had served for several years overseas at an international church in the Netherlands and that she learned so much from being out of her context
Mhm.
and realizing that in many churches, and you can tell me if this resonates with you or not, if you've seen this, often we can think about discipleship as turning somebody into something. They end up being discipled more into looking like us and our culture, our wherever our church ends up being, and we forget that really the end goal should be about pointing them to Jesus and helping
Becoming like
them
him.
look more and more like Jesus. Does that resonate with you or not?
Very much so. And I'm going to say something maybe controversial here.
Go
Okay.
for it.
Is this is my problem, or I think our challenge with this grand idea that has been seeded in the church of one-to-one discipleship. See, when
Oh yeah.
discipleship became, like back to your first question, when discipleship sort of became primarily about passing on head knowledge or these 9 lessons or these 4 lessons or this book that we take everybody through, well, then the easiest way to do it was, well, I don't want to have to run classes that no one shows up and prepares for. We'll just get everybody to get, everybody gets one. And it's like, okay, I don't think there's a problem with that. We see Jesus preach to the crowds, right? He taught those who followed him around, but he discipled those who he did life with, who would do life with him. But sometimes that was with all 12, sometimes that was with 3, sometimes it was just with one, kind of like our family life is. Our family, we call it Team K. It's very close, but we don't do every absolute everything together. And my wife and I, Tina, doesn't, we don't take we don't take attendance, hey, how come Justine's not here? Well, she had to work today, like, oh, well, that's, I don't know, she's not faithful. Like, what? She's working, like whatever. And,
Yeah.
and so when discipleship became primarily a passing on of the minimum requirements of head knowledge to be a Christian, no, that's not how you be a Christian. It's trust in Jesus. Then, well, let's do it one-to-one. And then it became something that starts and stops. And I don't see that. I think discipleship is all of life. It's a moving from unbelief to belief increasingly
Yeah.
in light of the gospel in absolutely every area of life. I'm getting to be an older man here, and I have a long way to go. There's still a lot of
Yeah.
unbelief, as evidenced by my words, actions, inner life, all that,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
who really is God and what's He accomplished in and through Christ, and what does God say is true of me.
Yeah. So much life change and transformation happens in healthy discipleship.
Yeah,
And I think that's one reason why we have seen, uh, I don't want to call everything a spiritual thing, a spiritual attack, but we've had some really heartbreaking news about unhealthy churches and unhealthy leaders in our churches. And a lot of my listeners have walked through these experiences. They want to learn about Jesus. They want to become
yeah.
more like him, but they're worried and a little bit reticent about entering into like an official discipleship relationship, especially if it's like with a one person type thing. Talk to me about how that can how you would maybe encourage a leader to handle somebody that has dealt with some really deep trauma in their churches, to encourage people to come close to Jesus while also, handling that tricky situation where these people are just not sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Amy, more it seems like more and more people feel that way. They have
Yeah.
had, weird situations either personally or they've witnessed them or they know others do, and it has eroded trust.
Yeah.
I think also I'm hearing that there's a deep sense of, uh, added to that, maybe wondering about the trust issues. Um, there's also this growing sense of, is this all there is?
Mhm.
Really? It's like, is sitting here singing some camp songs that aren't as good as what I hear on the radio most of the time, like,
Yeah, yeah.
and then hearing maybe a great message, but not nothing that if I was just to reproduce that, I couldn't. But if I could reproduce it as good as the pastor, my neighbors wouldn't even understand most of it, because
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
in a special language. You add that all up, and what we have found is people are really dying for relational peace with others and to find a safe place to be part of a family and a community that way. And that's exactly what you see the church in the first century is in much of the world. And that's what we're advocating and what my wife and I teach and coach to with others. And we coach as a couple, we coach others, but
Yeah.
our spiritual life and discipleship happens in our oikos, our extended family, with our kids and with what we refer to as people of peace. In other words, people who are just leaning into the family and we're
Mhm.
treating them like family and they're around all of it, all of life, how we talk about God and study the word and talk about, you know, our faith and challenges, and they see us fight and forgive. And when a person is invited into that appropriately over time, I'm not saying boom,
Yeah.
like join our family,
Yeah.
but like when, like we do happy hours in our neighborhood, that's a big thing. We do a happy hour. Well, people come out, and they have a little beverage of choice and some appetizers and they bring a few things. They go, well, wow, these are really cool people. And then maybe after a few times of that, you're like, I would love to get to know you and your spouse and your kids better. Like, could we have you guys over for pizza night, or something like that? Sure. And over time, trust is built appropriately.
Yeah.
And we even help we help train people on how to even do this, because it
Yeah.
seems like we've lost this art of friendship and being good neighbors and all. Um, and what happens is you find these people, not everybody, but God has them for every one of us. These people who are kind of leaning in, and they're like, Amy, I like you, it's like, and your family, the way you guys roll. And I'm really intrigued by how your kids have grown up this way. And they're so full of life and engaged and respectful, and they seem to like you still. And that's not our experience. And I want more of that. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you see happening in the Bible. And it wasn't everybody's front line of defense was like, well, come to Sunday service with me. It was like,
Yeah.
it was come to the table with us and experience the gospel in action. And I think that gets to be more and more of how the church says, well, how do we help people near or far, really hurt or afraid or lacking in trust, or the ones who trust? How do we begin to help our people live this way and treat more and more people like family? And maybe, God's got a lot of kids and some of them are
Mm.
far from dad. They don't trust dad. They don't trust dad's other kids very much. But how do we find those who God gives us, like we said, these people of peace who are kind of leaning into relationship and invite them into the circle of our life? Well, part of that means we have to model that life as leaders. We have to open up our homes. And this is the big rub, Amy. This is what we bump up against every
Uh-oh.
day. People hear, what we talk about. They hear my podcast. They read our books, and they go, "This sounds beautiful," but I'm just too busy for that, leading the
Mm.
programs. And there's no way my wife's having people over for dinner, every Thursday night or twice a week or something like that. There's no way. I'm like, well, there is a way. We get to, but we've built our lives primarily around us and our comfort and our preference and my schedule, my time, me, mine. And it's a very stressful way to live because you're having to monitor everything and who's in and who's out. But when you sort of decide to open up your life and just treat everybody the way you'd treat your own kids or your sister or whatever, it's easy. And
Yeah.
because you just live like, hey, we're having dinner anyway. You all want to join us? Okay, great. Oh, didn't work out? Okay, great. We're eating either way. We eat every night, turns out. So
Yeah.
we find that that's a much more natural way to live. And uh, small is big and slow is fast, but multiplication like this wins every day. Every church in the world right now, every church member, anybody who's going to a church, whatever, every church is all worried about decline in attendance and no one's coming anymore and the kids aren't here and all the college kids don't want to be around. And your church numbers could double if that's your big metric next week if just everybody in your church found one person apiece, and there was one person or couple who kind of leaning into their life, they like them, they know they're Christians, they're not freaked by that, and just started inviting them to the table more and inviting them into the life of Christ that
Yeah.
they're working out and living. Boom, the church doubles. Now, maybe not Sunday attendance, but the church, the
Yeah.
rings of relationship, just like we see in Scripture,
Yeah.
we would double, triple the church by next week.
And are we okay with that? Are we okay with the church doubling, even if it doesn't mean all the B's that we measure, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
is that okay?
that's you're a bit of a cynic here, Amy. I have seen
I
many.
am, yeah.
Here's the questions I get from pastors. Well, great, this all sounds great and everything, but where do they tithe? You know, this all sounds great, but what if they start doing communion at home? And they're not doing it here under our auspices. I'm like, you
Yeah,
mean like Jesus told everybody to do every time you have a meal, kind of remember me, use
yeah,
basic elements and do that? Oh, no, 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 no. It's got to be the way we do it with the little plastic cup and wafer, and we have to anoint it. And like, I don't find that. I just don't find that being the
yeah,
only way we get to do it. But
yeah,
those kinds of fears and control and authority start to creep in. And they always have. Even Jesus said, like, don't live that way. Don't top down this.
yeah,
This is family. Don't top down that. Like that's what the Romans do. Authority by title and
yeah.
position. Don't live that way. That's not how the kingdom works.
You said a word, several words that stuck out to me. One is invite. I love that. I think that is the antithesis of the worst stereotype of discipleship, where it is imposed upon someone. Like, you have shown up at a church and somebody has said, I am the leader of the women's discipleship, and I noticed that you weren't attending the women's retreat.
Mm,
And you
yeah,
don't have a relationship. You have no, like, agency in this relationship, and you haven't invited this. I mean, somebody didn't invite you into this relationship with them, and you certainly didn't say, "Hey, Susie, I would love for you to speak into my life." I love that word invite because it gives people a chance to say yes or no. Thoughts
yeah.
on that?
It does. We actually, Amy, we talk a lot about that. We do in our coaching. We One of the things that we teach to and we speak to a lot is something that we learned along the way. We saw Jesus perfectly calibrated something. Here's the words we use. You could use any words, but invitation
Right.
with challenge. Okay, now the
Yeah.
word challenge sounds like, oh, poke in the chest, like, hey, Amy, stop doing that or start this. No,
Yeah.
it's invitation, increasing access to you, your life, your thoughts, your time. He perfectly calibrated that with the challenge of the next relational step.
Yeah.
Come and follow me. Or you've heard it said, but I say, for those who have ears, let them hear what Jesus is saying. Hey, I know you were raised thinking this is what God was about, but what if it was this, right?
Yeah.
And when you see how Jesus made disciples, it was he was always ratcheting up both. We say, he was banking, and we get to bank invitation, time, access, trust, and then eventually we can quote spend it by going, hey, like I was just saying, like say someone comes over for appetizers or a happy hour or whatever, desserts or something like that, and so that's an invitation and access to our time. And instead of treating them like a guest, we treat them like family. We open up
Mhm.
our home, our lives, our hearts, our story. And then maybe the next appropriate quote challenge would be, hey, we'd love to get to know you and your family and your story a little bit better. Would you guys be up for dinner anytime, maybe on a weekend or something like that?
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, hey, thanks for coming to our open house tonight. You guys want to go on vacation next week with us and we'll split a condo? Like,
Yeah.
whoa, too much challenge. Or,
Yeah.
or I've never met you before. I'm gonna knock on your door and invite you to a 9-week thing we're doing at our house. A so and so course. You're like, but I don't know you. Why would I do that? That's Even if
Yeah.
I was a Christian, I'd say no because I don't. Maybe you're wacky or something. Jesus constantly calibrated this, and so we teach that too. How are we doing at calibrating invitation in people's lives, access to us,
Yeah.
with the next appropriate level of relational movement and change? You know what I mean? Like, what's that
Yeah.
next challenge up the slope relationally? And this applies to our marriage. This applies to our kids. And we have a whole lot of teaching on that we do. And people's eyes open up like, that's why that didn't work out. Or
Yeah.
that's why I'm having so much problem with my teenager. It's all challenge. The only time we talk is what they've done wrong, or they didn't clean their room, or did you get your homework done? Where's that
Mm.
invitation? Where's that fun? Where's that time of rebuilding the trust levels up and fun? And well, don't have it anymore. Or maybe it's that way in your marriage. Or some people think, I got to get everybody saved. So as soon as I meet them, it's little green booklet. It's a big invitation to this. It's that. And if
Yeah.
they're not interested, I'm like, on to the next.
Yeah.
Well, that's all challenge. Like, where's the invitation?
Yeah, and it
Jesus
feels so
said,
transactional. It
yeah,
feels like,
that's a
well,
good
I
word.
checked the box off. I discipled somebody. Asked one more person. I did my person. I did my one person,
Yeah,
Caesar.
I did it.
I
Well,
did
listen,
my one.
and truth is discipleship, if we did it as good as Jesus did,
Yeah.
it would be 3.5 years with the same group of people, and we'd be giving them pretty much all day and every
We
day.
give our lives up.
We'd give our lives up. So
Mhm.
this idea that we could somehow, Jesus took 3.5 years as Jesus, as the Son of God, both Son and man, man and God. He did it full time, 3.5 years. And in Matthew 28, it says at the ascension, as the
Mhm.
11 who were still alive watched him going up into the clouds, it said some of them still didn't believe.
Mm.
Go look that up. It's crazy. So not even all of them were real. I don't know yet. They seen the cross, they saw the resurrection, put their fingers in his holes. Like
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
And somehow we think we're going to do it either just to sit and listen to the sermons, which is what most churches assume, or 101, 201, 301, 401 class, or
Mhm.
maybe we're going to go 9 weeks topically. Like how if that could do, why didn't Jesus do it that way?
Mhm.
If one
Well,
more
because
good
he
sermon is
would
going,
have, Caesar.
huh?
He would have if he had the technology.
If he had just had PowerPoint and a big stage.
If he may have been the god of the universe,
And
but
there again, please, I don't want people to hear like, so everything our church is doing is wrong. No, it's not the full picture of
you're
what
saying
Jesus
you're
modeled
asking for
and gave
something
us.
bigger. Yeah.
And that's why, like our ministry and the podcast is called Everyday Disciple,
Yeah.
because we feel like that is what we get to be. That is what Jesus modeled. That is what he calls us to. And I'll take it even further. I believe it's what we were created for and saved into.
Mm, mhm.
Not saved from, but saved into. Is like, yeah, you get to live my life now, which is part of how God's filling the world with his glory. Jesus is
Mhm.
the glory of the Father, it says. He promises to fill the world with his glory. Paul called it the mystery revealed. What's the mystery revealed? Oh, it's that God's going to fill the world with his glory. In other words, what he's like through humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to save them and put his own spirit in them, and they're going to go out and show others what he's like. And more disciples will make more disciples. And that's how the world's getting filled with his glory. Like I said, Paul called it the mystery revealed.
Yeah. So you said this word a couple times. I wrote it down. You've got a sign behind you that says family. It sounds beautiful. This is Amy the cynic speaking for the cynics again.
Okay, here we go.
Um, because I like steward these listeners that are struggling and they're like, I am worried, Caesar, that this family thing that you are extending to me is conditional.
In what way?
What if I don't live up to XYZ? Am I going to lose this family?
Well, a lot of us have not great family experiences. So, like,
Yeah.
even when we talk about family, it's not uncommon, Amy, for people to go, that doesn't sound inviting to me.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't eat together much. And when we did, it was like a war zone. And that's
Yeah.
why I don't really do Christmas or Thanksgiving even with my family. Or we do it, but it's more like we're tolerating each other's presence for the
Yeah.
minimum amount of time and out of here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, so we've learned to quantify that or qualify that a little bit. Say like when we talk about family, and this is what we're trying to become increasingly, and we'd love your help,
Yeah.
is a healthy family, one who has God as their daddy, their Abba Father, Jesus is their brother. In
Mhm.
Hebrews, it says Jesus is not ashamed to call us brothers and sisters. Oh,
Yeah.
what? So we have God as our father, Jesus is our brother, and we're empowered by the Holy Spirit, God's own spirit, the power that raised Christ from the dead. And when God created us in his own image and says, "You're mine. That's, who you are. You're part of this family." That's not a do to be. That's a we get to be
Mm,
because of what Jesus has done. That whole thing of this, is this qualified? Like, how do I lose that? What do I have to do to maintain my status? That's the enemy. That's the beast. This idea
mhm,
of do to be. What you do. If you do this, Amy, you'll be a good Christian. If you do this, you'll get these letters after your name after you put in enough years of
mm,
college. If you
mhm.
do this, this, and this, and you do these grades, or do to be can also be don't to be. Christians
Yeah,
don't do this and Christians don't do that. And that's how you please God. But
yeah.
that's all a lie from the enemy. I actually think that's the beast that scripture talks about in our apocalyptic books. The
Yes.
beast is no, no, no. What you do equals who you are. Your value, your identity comes from your doing. That's the beast. Our identity flows right from God, Trinitarian identity, Father, Son, and Spirit. We're part of his family of missionary servants. That's who we are, not because of anything we've done. My kids are not Kalinowskis because of
Mhm.
anything they've done. They were
Mm,
born Kalinowskis. They were born loved forever. Nothing they can do will ever stop that love. They don't have to earn it. They never have to ask to come over. That's the kind of family the church gets to be. I think by God's grace, that's how our family lives. And that's how we help lots and lots of other families and pastors seed that into their own life and then into their church as well. People are just, they're dying for that, Amy.
yeah, they
They
are.
really, really are. And all you can do is offer, invite, like you said, and taste and see. Like, hey,
Yeah,
come and hang out. I mean, that's our secret weapon is Team K, our family. Come and hang
yes.
out with the family a bit, and you're going to go, I love hanging with this family. Your kids are amazing. Our kids are all grown. They're all in their 30s now.
Yeah,
But hey, they love God. They love people. They're our best friends. Now I've got 4 grandkids. They just think grandma and grandpa hung the moon. They love
yeah,
us. It is the most fun life you could have. But it's not just us. It includes all kinds of other people that are sort of honorary family members, and they know it. And it's as evidenced by they just come on over, walk in the door, they open up the fridge. They're just here. They're a part of it whenever they want to, need to be, as we invite them to things. And it's not this big free for all. It's not like the house has just got trillions of people
yeah,
floating in and all. It's just our family life, but we live open door, and we try to treat people like family. Not everybody accepts that, but a
yeah.
whole lot of people, more than we can probably even be with, do.
That is
And
that
that's
I
why we're
like
trying
how
to.
you describe that as not something you have to do, but identity that you actually have. Like
Yeah,
you are family,
yeah, that's
and
true of you.
that's not going away. It does it
Paul says in Scripture that we all bear the same last name
mm.
because we all have the same Father. And by the way, he wasn't talking to Christians there.
Oh,
I know
wow.
we've got a big, huge who's in and who's out, component to the church at times. And I have this discussion with lots of people, and they're like, "Well, there's
Mhm.
this one verse, though. You can be the father of the devil." It's like, back up a little. Jesus is saying, when you live this way, it's as if your father is the devil,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
your true father who created you in his own image to be like him. It says in Genesis. So this, I just, if anybody takes anything away from our discussion today, Amy, I would say it is this: don't believe the do to be
yeah,
lie. The do equals be lie. It's because of what Jesus has done, we get to be who we were created to be. You don't have to earn that. You don't have to prove that. There's not, isn't it beautiful? God says that he has chosen to put our sins away and remember them no more. They're not
yes.
only forgiven, but he has chosen to forget them, meaning what sin? God's not going, oh, have you met Amy? My daughter Amy? She used to do this and back in college that. And even sometimes she still does this, but I forgave all that. God
Mhm.
goes, what sin? I'm crazy about Amy. Have you met Amy? You got to meet her. I'm
Yeah,
nuts about her. And that's hard for us to grasp, because even when we forgive others, it's still on the list.
yeah,
Yeah, I know this guy for like since college or since high school, and a couple times this, but we got past it. I love him. Why are you still talking about it?
yeah,
God's
yeah,
God's chosen to say, like, what sin? You're not the person in God's mind who used to dot dot dot,
yeah,
yeah, oh, I had to hang on this cross for that. No, like, it's all been forgiven and forgotten. Jesus says it is finished.
yeah.
When we start to live that way in light of what God says is true of us, so much freedom.
Yeah.
So much freedom.
That sounds lovely. I love that not being obsessed with gatekeeping and that the work is done. Let's open the door. Let's just get out of the way so
Be.
that people can see Jesus more clearly and we can hopefully reflect Jesus to each other as we grow more in becoming like him and our spiritual formation. I have loved having this conversation with you. Thank you for letting me be cynical a little bit. Thank you for being
I
willing
shouldn't
to.
use that word. It's not cynical. I think it's
No,
real. I
we
think
just
it's real.
asked some real questions. It means a lot that you answered them. It says a lot about not being afraid. Um, I hope that people can learn from that. That let's listen to these questions. Let's answer those questions. Listen to them. Ask them. That is part of the whole relationship. This is part of the whole discipleship thing. Is that you get to bring all of you because
Yeah.
Jesus offered all of him already, right?
Yeah.
So
You do. Without fear.
yeah.
So, well, if it's okay, I'd love to invite people who want to hear a little bit more about how this all works
Yes.
to at least come and say hi, at the podcast, the Everyday Disciple podcast. Um, you find it anywhere, it's everywhere
Yep.
podcasts are. Don't listen to it till after you've listened to Amy's new episode.
Well,
and,
it'll be
uh,
fine because they'll
and
have
I'm
to listen all the way to the end to get to that part anyway.
Yeah.
So it's all
And
good.
yeah, and there's a few other podcasts that have similar names now, but look for the one with Caesar Kalinowski on it, Everyday Disciple
Yep.
podcast, little feet running across the logo. You'll see it. And and also if you just go to everydaydisciple.com,
Yeah.
it's singular, everydaydisciple.com. There are so many free resources, including that what are the new measurements of
Yeah.
success for a church, that
Yeah.
10 benchmarks thing. That's there for free. There's free books to download, all kinds of video, audio, all of it. And the podcast links there as well. But you can find it on Spotify or your Apple
All the
or
places.
iTunes.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there's so many resources to help live that. And every week on the podcast, 6 years now, every Monday, I was sharing with you.
Yeah.
We just talk about some topic and say, okay, then how would the gospel speak to that? And how would we live that out in normal everyday life?
Yeah.
So it's not some big high flying theological dip into the Greek and Hebrew. It's like, okay, parenting, or hey, what's going on with this cancel culture? Or well, how do you have good family dinners and
Yeah.
not be weird about it when the kids are melting down? Like everything. And then how would the gospel speak to that? And we could live that out normally and not be weird or freaky about it. That's kind of what we talk about every week. So,
I love that. I will link to that in the show notes so people can find that easily.
thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And, maybe we can do this again sometime.